Hello, I am Professor Sims, and in this video I will discuss the endocrine system. This is the first in a series of 10 lessons held as part of my Anatomy and Physiology 2 online laboratory course. If you're a student currently enrolled in this course, please consult the syllabus and course Moodle site for assignments, quizzes, due dates, and other course information. In this unit, we'll learn about the overall function of the endocrine system, we'll describe the functions of the endocrine organs, identify endocrine structures in models and specimens, identify histological features under the microscope, and we'll list major hormones and their sources. The endocrine system is a key regulatory system in the body responsible for maintaining homeostasis and coordinating complex functions over time. Its primary role is to secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream, allowing these chemical messengers to travel throughout the body and influence the activity of target cells and organs. This system includes major endocrine glands such as the pituitary gland, often referred to as the master gland, as well as the thyroid, adrenal glands, and pancreas. All of these organs produce specific hormones that regulate vital processes like metabolism, growth, stress response, and blood sugar balance. In addition to these dedicated glands, the endocrine system also includes other organs that contain endocrine cells, such as the kidneys, heart, and gonads. These organs primarily serve other functions, but they also release hormones that play important roles in blood pressure regulation, reproductive function, and more. Hormones can be classified in several ways based on their chemical structure and how they interact with target cells. One major group is amino acid-based hormones, which include amines, peptides, and proteins. Examples of these are hormones like TRH, CRH, GHRH, growth hormone, ACTH, TSH, ADH, thyroid hormones T3 and T4, parathyroid hormone PTH, and arterial natriuretic peptide AMP. These hormones are generally water soluble and they act quickly in the body. And don't worry, we're going to go over these abbreviations shortly. Another important group is going to be your steroid-based hormones, which are derived from cholesterol. This group includes cortisol, androgens, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and calcitriol. Because of the lipid-soluble nature, steroid hormones can easily cross cell membranes, and they typically have longer-lasting effects. When considering solubility, hormones are often categorized as either lipid-soluble or water-soluble, right? So we just talked about the lipid-soluble hormones, the steroids, but also these are thyroid hormones and calcitriol. And these are going to diffuse through the cell membrane to bind with receptors inside the cell. This is different from the water-soluble hormones. So these are things like insulin, glucagon, growth hormone, all these ones that we were talking about earlier. These are water-soluble, and they cannot cross the cell membrane. Instead, they bind to receptors on the cell surface, triggering a cascade of internal cellular responses. So this is a helpful table. This comes from the textbook, and it categorizes the hormones based on where they come from and what their function is. So here's where you're going to see a lot of those abbreviations that we were just talking about. GH is growth hormone, TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. You're going to want to know these, and not only their names, but also their abbreviations, and also what organs or structures produce them and what their target is, what's their function. And this first table here has water-soluble hormones, the ones that cannot enter the cell membrane. This slide here is going to be the ones that are derived from steroids. So they are lipid-soluble and they can pass through the cell membrane. So before starting the lab exercises, there's a few important things that you should do. First, you want to carefully read the endocrine system chapter in the textbook and in the lab manual. You want to build a solid understanding of the key concepts, the structures, the functions, which steroids are doing what. In the lab manual, it's mostly going to have information in the introduction section and the background section. And finally, you want to complete the pre-lab exercises 1.1 through 1.3. Your responses to these exercises are going to help you prepare for the Lab 1 quiz. In other words, the quiz is going to have stuff from this on there. So make sure you do the pre-lab exercises. And then once you have done all of the pre-lab stuff, the lab exercises, this is lab exercise 1.1. And this one, you're going to explore the key endocrine structures using anatomical models to familiarize yourself with their locations and relationships. So if you have models or access to models, you can do that. But I have provided images. So what you'll do is you'll use chapter 1 of the lab manual as your guide. You're going to start with the brain model shown in figure 1.2 in the lab manual. And that's where you can identify and label the thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, pineal gland, and infundibulum. Then you will move on to the torso model and reproductive system model. So these are going to be figures 1.3 to 1.5. And in these models, you're going to want to identify and label the thyroid gland, adrenal glands, pancreas, and gonads, which are going to be, of course, ovaries in females and testes in males. And this exercise helps you to visually connect the structure and position of the endocrine organs, which is an important step in understanding how they function and integrate within the body. So on this slide, you can see the anatomical model of the brain with arrows pointing to several key endocrine structures that you will need to recognize. These include the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus acts as a critical control center, linking the nervous and endocrine systems. And then just below the hypothalamus, that's where you find the pituitary gland. This is often called the master gland because it regulates many other endocrine glands throughout the body. And then you also want to be able to find the pineal gland. This is a small structure that's involved in regulating circadian rhythms throughout the day through hormone secretion. But it is this little tiny gland here. Also, you will want to find the thalamus. That's going to be this structure here. The thalamus is not an endocrine gland itself, but it is important. It's an important relay station for sensory information. It works very closely with the hypothalamus. And then finally, the infundibulum, this here. The infundibulum is a stalk that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, and its structure allows for communication and hormone transport between these two vital parts of the endocrine system. Let's look some more at the thalamus and hypothalamus. The thalamus serves as the brain's main sensory relay center. It processes incoming sensory information and transmits it to the cerebral cortex for interpretation. Beyond this role, the thalamus also works closely with the hypothalamus to help regulate autonomic functions and emotional responses. The hypothalamus is a critical link between the nervous and endocrine systems because it plays a key role in maintaining the body's internal balance, otherwise known as homeostasis, by regulating functions such as temperature, hunger, and stress response. The hypothalamus produces several hormones that control the activity of the anterior pituitary gland. For example, it releases thyrotropin-releasing hormone, TRH, which signals the pituitary to release thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH, which ultimately influences the production of thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. Together with the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus acts as the master regulator of the endocrine system, coordinating hormonal signals that maintain overall physiological stability. The pituitary gland is a small but powerful endocrine gland located just inferior to the hypothalamus. It sits securely within a bony structure of the skull called the sella turcica, which is part of the sphenoid bone. The pituitary gland has two distinct lobes with different functions. The anterior pituitary, also known as the adenohypophysis, produces and releases hormones such as growth hormone, or GH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, luteinizing hormone, which is LH, and prolactin, or PRL. The posterior pituitary, or the neurohypophysis, stores and secretes hormones produced by the hypothalamus, primarily antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and oxytocin. Together, the two lobes of the pituitary gland control many functions in the the body by regulating other endocrine glands and influencing things like growth and metabolism, reproduction, and even water balance. The pineal gland is a small pea-shaped endocrine gland located posterior to the thalamus and superior to the cerebellum within the brain. The primary function of the pineal gland is to regulate the body's sleep-wake cycle, also known as circadian rhythm. It accomplishes this by producing and releasing the hormone melatonin, especially in response to darkness. Melatonin helps signal the body when it's time to prepare for sleep, and in this way it helps to maintain healthy sleep patterns and overall daily rhythms. On this slide you can see two anatomical models showing the endocrine structures of the neck and abdomen. These models highlight glands and organs outside of the brain that play vital roles in the endocrine system. The structures in the neck include thyroid gland, this one here, which regulates metabolism, and the nearby parathyroid glands involved in calcium balance. Moving down the abdomen, you'll notice glands such as the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys. These guys here, adrenal glands. The pancreas, which is this guy here. The pancreas controls blood sugar regulation, right? And then the gonads, you have ovaries in females, which is not shown here, but here you have testes in males. These, of course, produce all of the sex hormones. So while the brain houses key endocrine structures like hypothalamus and pituitary gland, these models focus on the peripheral glands. Let's look at the thyroid first. Located on the anterior neck, just inferior to the larynx, so it's just below the Adam's apple. It has two distinct lobes, one on each side of the trachea, connected by a central mass called the isthmus. This butterfly-shaped gland wraps around the front of the windpipe, and it's often visible or palpable in a physical exam. The thyroid helps to regulate the body's metabolism and blood calcium levels. It produces three main hormones: thyroxine, T4, and triiodothyronine, which is T3. And these control the rate at which cells use energy. Then you also have calcitonin, which helps lower blood calcium levels by promoting calcium storage in bones. The thyroid gland's function is tightly regulated by signals from the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, which forms a feedback loop essential for energy balance and growth. Next, let's focus in on the parathyroid glands. These are small but essential structures that are often overlooked due to their size and location. These glands are typically found embedded in the posterior surface of the thyroid, and most people have 4 parathyroid glands, but the exact number can vary from person to person. Despite their size, the parathyroid glands are very important in calcium homeostasis. Their primary function is to increase blood calcium levels, which is important for proper nerve function, muscle contraction, and even bone health. And they do this by producing parathyroid hormone, or PTH, which stimulates calcium release from the bones, enhances calcium absorption in the intestines, and reduces calcium loss in urine. So in short, while the thyroid helps lower blood calcium through calcitonin, the parathyroid works to raise calcium levels, keeping this important mineral within a healthy range. Each adrenal gland has 2 distinct regions, each with very different functions. The outer region is the adrenal cortex, which produces several important hormones such as aldosterone, which helps regulate sodium and fluid balance, cortisol, which plays a role in stress response and metabolism, and androgens, which are sex hormones that contribute to reproductive development and function. The inner region is the adrenal medulla, which is part of the sympathetic nervous system. It produces the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. These hormones are responsible for fight or flight response, preparing the body to respond quickly to stress by increasing heart rate, blood pressure, and energy availability. So essentially, the adrenal cortex and medulla allow the body to maintain balance under normal conditions, but also respond effectively to stress. The pancreas is located posterior to the stomach, nestled along the first segment of the small intestine, known as the duodenum. While it plays plays a digestive role through enzyme secretion. We're focusing here on its endocrine function. So the pancreas is important for maintaining blood glucose balance. It contains clusters of endocrine cells called islets of Langerhans, which secrete several important hormones. You have alpha cells that produce glucagon. Glucagon raises blood sugar levels by signaling the liver to release stored glucose. Then you have beta cells. Beta cells produce insulin. Insulin lowers blood sugar by promoting glucose uptake into the cells. The pancreas also produces somatostatin, which helps regulate other hormone levels, and pancreatic peptide, which is involved in digestive processes. So by coordinating the release of all of these hormones, the pancreas is helping to ensure that your blood glucose levels remain within a healthy range. And this, of course, is important for energy balance and overall metabolic health. Now, while the ovaries and testes have obvious reproductive roles, they're also important as endocrine organs because they contribute to hormonal balance and overall physiological regulation throughout the body. In females, the ovaries are paired, almond-sized organs located inside the pelvic cavity. Their main functions are to produce steroid hormones, specifically estrogen and progesterone, and to support the development of oocytes or egg cells. These hormones are essential for regulating the menstrual cycle, maintaining pregnancy, and supporting secondary sex characteristics. In males, the testes are located outside of the pelvic cavity, suspended in a pouch-like sac called the scrotum. They have a dual role, that is to say that they function to produce sperm for reproduction, and they secrete testosterone, which is the primary male sex hormone. Testosterone is critical for development of male reproductive tissues, and it is important for building muscle mass, bone density, and other secondary sex characteristics in males. Now for the lab exercise 1.2, you're going to begin examining endocrine tissue histology using the images provided in figures 1.6 through 1.9. This exercise is designed to help you recognize microscopic structures of major endocrine organs and understand how form relates to function. As you review these figures, pay close attention to identifying specific cell types. So, for instance, in the thyroid gland, look for follicle cells, which surround the hormone-filled follicles, and then parafollicle cells, which are located between the follicles and produce calcitonin. In the parathyroid gland, try to identify the more lightly staining oxyphil cells in contrast to the more abundant chief cells. By the way, we're going to look at this in more detail in just a moment. But overall, this is what you're looking for. So in the adrenal gland, this is the adrenal cortex. You want to be able to distinguish the different zones of the cortex. The zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis, as well as the medulla. And each zone produces different hormones that have a unique histological appearance. And then in the pancreatic tissue, you're going to identify the islets of Langerhans and locate the alpha cells and beta cells, which, as we discussed, are responsible for glucagon and insulin production, respectively. You want to take your time to carefully compare the histology slides, the labeled figures, because this is going to help you make accurate identification and prepare you for upcoming lab assessments. So let's look at some more histology slides. These images are representative of what you would see under the microscope. So it's important to visually distinguish them. So let's start here with the thyroid gland. The hallmark feature is its spherical follicles, and then each follicle is lined with follicular cells that produce and store thyroid hormone precursors in the colloid. Between the follicles, look for parafollicular cells, or C cells, which are less abundant and found in spaces between follicles. So just remember that para means next to, and then these cells lie next to, but not within the follicles. And then this big pink follicle, it's big like that because it contains the colloid. Next, the parathyroid gland appears to be, it's more compact. So it's a more compact cluster of cells, and it's often adjacent to thyroid tissue. And it may contain both small, darker chief cells, these guys here, that look strikingly similar to follicle cells over here. Those are chief cells. Those are the ones that secrete parathyroid hormone. And then you have larger, lighter oxyphil cells. So it's difficult to see here, but they are lighter in color and they're also larger than chief cells. And then this opening here is not a cell. This is actually a blood vessel. In the adrenal gland, you can recognize the distinct layering of the cortex and the medulla down here. So these three here, these three zona, these are the three zones of the cortex. The zona glomerulosa has round clusters of cells, and then the zone beneath it, the fasciculata, has longer, paler staining cords, and then the reticularis is even more darker and even more irregular. And then the medulla is a deeper, often stained, a darker purple, and it contains cells that produce the epinephrine and norepinephrine. So this can be difficult to distinguish. Remember, 3 layers of cortex and then the medulla at the end. Finally, you have the pancreas. The pancreas contains both exocrine and endocrine tissue. The darker staining clusters are acini, which secrete digestive enzymes, and then scattered within them are pale circular groups, which are the islets of Langerhans. So this whole thing here is an islet of Langerhans. Within the islets, beta cells that produce insulin tend to cluster more centrally. These are beta cells. And then alpha cells that produce glucagon are more peripheral. Usually, this is actually showing the opposite. A helpful mnemonic to use for this is BIGA, B-I-G-A. Beta equals insulin. Glucagon equals alpha. For lab exercise 1.3, you'll explore endocrine physiology through an interactive online simulation focused on blood glucose regulation. For this activity, you're going to need access to an internet-connected computer, and that's it. To begin, you want to navigate to the site, which is here. I'm actually going to copy that. Once you're there, you're going to select the simulation titled Blood Glucose Regulation, and then this tool is going to help you visualize how the body maintains homeostasis in response to changes in blood glucose level. So this is what the pre-lab quiz for the simulation looks like. I would like you to complete this and of course the pre-lab quiz for the class. If you do those first, then as you go through the simulation, it will be easier for you to connect form to function, and also make sure you fill out the reporting sections in the lab manual to track your observations. One of the key tasks for this is going to be to predict and identify when specific molecules peak, including glucose, insulin, glucagon, and ketones, under different conditions like fasting or after a carbohydrate-rich meal. So just real quickly, I want to show you when you first go to that URL, you're going to have to pick this here. It's going to be number 5, blood glucose regulation. And then it's going to take you through the objectives. There's a review section here where they have animations and other resources to help you understand what is going on as far as endocrine regulation and blood glucose. There is reporting. So you are making predictions based on what you know about the hormones and how blood glucose is regulated. And then you actually have here in data collection, you have like test subjects. And then you have a simulation where they are consuming a test meal, and then you are sampling their blood plasma. You're going to centrifuge those, and you're going to analyze the hormones that are in the blood. So you see what's happening is you're just following the directions down here, and you're doing what it's telling you to do. Like I click on the samples, they're going in the fridge. We're going to pull some more stuff from the next fasting state and the next subject. You get the idea. that exercise is really going to help you tie together structure and function, which is an important thing to be able to do in this course in general. You'll be able to see that the hormones secreted by the pancreas are directly affecting blood glucose and energy balance. Take your time clicking through the simulation. Make sure you reflect on the physiological patterns that you observe. And this figure here is just going through how normal blood glucose is maintained. There's a video here also that can help walk you through these steps, but essentially if your blood glucose increases too much, pancreas produces insulin. Then the glucose is processed and sent to body cells and your blood glucose level falls. Now if it falls too much, then the pancreas creates glucagon, and this helps break down glycogen and release glucose back into the bloodstream. You probably already know this, but when this process is not functioning properly, there's a name for that. It is called diabetes. And there are multiple types of diabetes. In fact, you will be doing a case study on a subject that is diabetic. Let's get to the dissection stuff. So the in-class students will be performing dissections on fetal pigs. We're not doing that for the online section, but you should still be able to identify all of the endocrine structures, well, most of the endocrine structures in a fetal pig dissection. So for in-person labs, you would need preserved pig dissection tools, personal protective equipment. You would have labeled diagrams, and then because it's a BSL-1 activity, you would follow all of the basic safety protocols, including handling of sharps and disinfecting workspace before and after dissection, etc. Then it would begin with external observation of the specimen, followed by initial incision to expose internal structures, and then to identify the endocrine organs, including thyroid, thymus, pancreas, adrenal glands, and gonads. If you are doing this course online, or even if you are in a face-to-face lab and there's no specimen available, you can and should refer to the figures provided in the following slides and in your lab manual to visually locate and study these structures. And this will ensure that you meet the same learning objectives through virtual observation. So here, so trigger warning if you are sensitive to this kind of thing. The next slides are going to be dissected feral pigs, right? So here you can see the thymus and the thyroid. This is in the neck area. This is the throat. And then this is in the abdomen. You can see here the lungs, the liver, gallbladder, your intestines. The pancreas is sitting right here. And then your adrenal glands, the adrenal glands are sitting right above the kidneys. You can see how it's much more difficult to see these things in a dissected animal than it is in a model. So here are the adrenal glands. There's a lot of stuff here you don't necessarily need to know, so don't let that scare you. But just know that like this is the kidney and ureter, and like this is this area zoomed way in, okay? Just know that the adrenal glands is going to sit right on top of the kidneys, okay? And then if you were looking at a female pig, you would see the ovaries. They're actually quite small compared to the bladder. And then the testes, they are outside of the abdomen, okay? But you can see where you can differentiate from the urethra, right? And the penis, and you can't really see the penis in this picture very well, but up here is the bladder, okay? So that's going to be it for this lab. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to do the reading. Check the description for more videos related to these topics and leave your questions for me in the comments below.